Voxxed Days Bristol with Kate, who's speaking this afternoon about securing microservices, and it's a practical example using Game On, which we spoke to Adam about earlier. So you've written a book about the best practices for microservices, and we also did a Voxxed Q&A, so you can have a look at the website on some of the basics, like what are the changing landscape threats. So I wanted to ask you something a bit different. I wanted to ask you whether you think that with the change from monoliths to microservices and everything that comes with it, including looking at security and authentication, whether you think we've done enough to shift our thinking as developers towards developing in a microservices mindset.
That's a very interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before. And I think that in some ways, no, there's still a lot of change that needs to happen in terms of that shifting mindset. And part of the reason for that is I know people who've been potentially building microservices but are still kind of leaving the DevOps side maybe a little bit later, or kind of still almost having a silo approach maybe to microservices. And I think it's something that's difficult to kind of change in your mindset, because we've been so used to the environment where, we have one set of people kind of writing code, and then another set of testing it, and then another set who deal with we can add the security on and we can build in the infrastructure. And we're suddenly not just in an environment where a single team has to worry about all these things, but they have to be able to implement them and really be responsible for the whole life cycle. And I think a lot of that comes not just from changing your thinking, but also the way teams are set up. So it might be, to begin with, we actually need to have a team that has someone who knows about DevOps and someone who knows about testing and someone who knows about development, and then gradually the team kind of evolves over time and then builds up the skills. So for example, I know in our team, when we were creating Game On, we had one or two people who were really kind of on it with testing, and we're like, we need to test from the start. Every time we put code in, it was like, you need to get a test in. And maybe to begin with, other people in the team, myself included, would forget about testing or forget about security. But then now, because we've all worked together for a year, 2 years now, we're now getting into that mindset of, oh, okay, I've written some code, I need to test it. I've written some new endpoint, how am I going to secure it? So I think there is that kind of evolution, and I think we're doing kind of the right things to go along that, but I think it is going to take time for people to kind of adapt and get their heads around it and really start thinking about security and testing and communication first, that they might have had to in the past might have left until later.
So that's a really interesting point, because I was talking to someone earlier about how, and he said in DevOps, about now we're doing microservice continuous delivery. There's a lot of pressure on developers to be doing the ops and the testing, but actually that does sometimes just leave a lot of the expertise that's already available outside of the team.
Yeah, I definitely think it needs to be something that's not just developers pushing forwards and learning all these new skills. It needs to be something that the whole team is involved with. And if there are people with existing skills, then you can use those existing skills and bring them forwards, and then even maybe have some people who were traditionally doing a more DevOps role understand more of what code is being delivered, and kind of bring everyone forward together, rather than it being from one side with the other side being like, oh, hang on a sec, we were doing this before and now you're doing it, but you're not doing it with the expertise level that we already have. So using those skills, if you have them already, it's definitely important.
It's like, I've definitely been on teams before where we haven't had a tester. Like, you don't need a tester. I think actually, I only test the code I think I write most of the time.
Yeah, I think from the testing side, it's interesting, because I would definitely say I would count myself as a software engineer rather than a software developer. So I'd say I would generally do test-driven development and write my tests first. But as you say, if you have come from an environment where you were just a developer and you didn't do as much testing, then it might be you need to bring someone in to then grow the skills before you can then say, okay, I'm happy now and I can go ahead and take those skills forwards. So it really is quite a big shift, I guess, in a lot of ways, organisationally wise, as well as the kind of technology changes that are coming along.
Yes. So now, when you test your microservices, do you get outside groups in to do, say, for example, penetration testing, as well as maybe unit testing that the authentication software works, or libraries?
So for Game On specifically, we haven't done any of this, just because it's kind of a learning environment. We haven't quite got to that level where we've looked at this specifically. But I think it is important to do a range of different testing and kind of when you are building a microservice, if different teams are owning different services, you should be doing testing kind of in an isolated unit with your little microservice over here. And then you need to do some testing at the next level up where you've all kind of put everything in a staging environment and test it. And then also the level above in production, doing some tests there, I think is important, even just within your own team, but also I guess bringing in people who have expertise is always a good idea. But for example, we're using a technology called Amalgamate to do our service discovery, just because it allows us to inject bad data in requests, and we can see how the system is handling it live, which is something that's really powerful and something you maybe haven't had to consider before, just because everything was in one place, so you could test it all in one place. Now that it's more distributed and things might come and go, you really need to at some point do an end-to-end test, but it might be later in the cycle than you previously were doing it.